Hello, welcome back to my channel. My name is Ayelet. I'm the mother of two, a 2-year-old and a 4-month-old. And on this channel, I share about Montessori, motherhood, respectful parenting, all sorts of things like that. So thank you so much for joining. Today's video, I'm going to be talking about our nursing journey, my nursing journey with both kids. So I've exclusively breastfed both of my children, and we've had two pretty different journeys, though similar in certain ways. So I'm going to talk a bit about that. I get asked all the time about weaning, about nursing, about if we've had any struggles, and we have. So I wanted to talk about that and get on to do that. This is the first video I'm recording in our new house. So we have this lovely pink color, which makes photography quite difficult in this room. It's not always going to be pink, but hopefully it will not turn me pink, because that's something I have had struggles with when trying to do photos in this room, is all photos turn pink. Anyway, thank you so much for joining, and I'm gonna jump in to talk about our nursing journeys. So, as I mentioned, I have exclusively breastfed both of my children, so my daughter for the first 4 months of her life, and my son from birth until he was about 20 months old was the last time he nursed. So I'm gonna talk a bit about both of those journeys. So with my son, I was really excited about breastfeeding, and I had pumped colostrum prior to going to the hospital, which was a decision I'm really grateful I did, because he had some issues latching at the beginning. He had a tongue tie, which we found at the hospital, and there were just, I don't know if it was because of the tongue tie, I'm not exactly sure, but we couldn't get a good latch. The lactation consultants at the hospital were really unhelpful, and that was just really frustrating. They were pushing me to use bottles, which I really didn't want to do. I was wanting to, as much as possible, feed directly at the beginning. So I really didn't want to do bottles. They were pushing that. We were using syringes at first and things like that, some spoons. So that was a little bit of a rocky start. We eventually had a lactation consultant who recommended using nipple shields, which totally changed the game. He was able to use those. So I didn't use bottles anymore, which I'd been using pumped milk in bottles for a bit. Sorry about that. I thought my baby needed me, so I put on the wrap. My husband's got it, but she might be back to join us. Anyway, so I was talking about colostrum. So I brought colostrum to the hospital, which I was really glad I did, because the lactation consultants at the hospital, not super supportive. So the early days with my son, we had a lot of struggles. He was using the shields, which was fine. It was working, but there's a lot of back arching. He'd come off all the time. The shields would fall off. I really did not like those things. I was really stressed about, will we ever be able to not use them? Luckily though, when my son was 3.5 months old, I took him to nurse, and I looked at him, and we made eye contact, and I just thought, maybe I'll try without a shield. And he just latched perfectly, and we never used him a single time after that. So that was just a really funny part of our journey, is just how sudden it was, and suddenly we were able to latch perfectly. And so from then, we kept nursing, and we loved to nurse, and we nursed a lot. We never really used bottles after those first few days. I just preferred that. It's not that I even really disliked pumping. As I said, I had an oversupply, and we donated a bunch of milk, and so I pumped for that. I just preferred it and found it easier to just directly feed him, and stay home with him, and I just had no reason that I felt the need to introduce bottles. And he started drinking from an open cup at 6 months old, and then a straw cup soon after. But I just never really felt the need. So I personally didn't use bottles, and I know that's a controversial thing. I know a lot of people really feel like you should do bottles. Personally, it just didn't feel necessary for us, and so I preferred to just directly feed. That's what we did every single time. So with the shields, and then directly once he got off the shields. So I decided to continue breastfeeding until my son either self-weaned, or I don't know if I felt like it was time when it was no longer working for either of us. And that definitely wasn't at a year. I was very happily nursing at a year, so we kept going. So it was extended breastfeeding, it's called now. Definitely didn't feel extended to me. It just felt like we were doing what we were doing. But I definitely noticed that I started getting negative comments, even by 13, 14 months. People who are saying, ew, like, he's too old, that's a big kid, he shouldn't be breastfeeding. And I was like, the WHO and AAP both recommend breastfeeding until 2. So that was a bit disappointing that people are still so judgmental about that, despite the recommendations actually being until 2. And I was kind of shocked to see how early that judgment started and people thinking it's gross and all of that and weird, which I just found frankly weird that they felt that way. This is a totally normal thing. And the age of, the average global age of weaning you're looking at as being, I think it's 2 to 7, they say. Like, it's way older than we push in the US. The idea here being, I guess, even though the AAP now says, and that was a recent change, until 2, it had been a year previously. And I think a lot of people feel like, exclusively breastfeeding for 6 months and then breastfeeding after until a year and then being done, which you totally can be. There's nothing wrong with that. But for us, we wanted to keep going, and I was shocked and disappointed to see how much judgment is really around that and how many people felt like it was gross or whatever when it's so totally normal and such a normal part of biology. Like, a toddler is not seeing breasts in any sort of weird way. So we did continue breastfeeding past a year, and again, that was something I'd always planned to do, and I'd always planned to breastfeed until 2, which didn't end up happening. So what happened there, I got pregnant with my daughter when he was 13 months, I wanna say, 12 or 13 months, something like that, right after his first birthday. So when I got pregnant with my daughter, after a month or 2, we decided to night wean. So at this point, I'd been able to settle him some without a milk in the middle of the night, and my husband was able to settle him some without milk in the middle of the night. So we decided to try night weaning and see how it went. And I was not so wed to the idea at the time. I was sort of had this feeling, if it works, that would be fantastic. I'm struggling with sleep with being pregnant. I tend to have pretty bad pregnancy insomnia. So if it works, great. If not, if he's too upset, like, I wasn't so wed to the idea of night weaning. So it went super easily. We switched my son to the floor bed at that time for the night, where he'd been there for his first part of the night, he'd been there for nap. So we switched him there with my husband, responding at night at that point. So that all went really smoothly, and he kept breastfeeding during the day. And then that started to sort of slowly taper off. My supply dropped a lot during pregnancy, and so he was less interested, and it was happening less and less. He would nurse at night, but he was no longer falling asleep nursing. We switched to just me lying there, and he was just not falling asleep. So that sort of kept going on, and it was less and less. And then at about 20 months is the last time he nursed. I have a photo of it because it had been a few days, and it was definitely like, I could tell it was coming to an end. So I took a photo of that last time. It was something that was special. It was something I definitely wasn't ready for. I was really, really hoping to nurse until 2, because that was my ideal, was to nurse until 2. And it didn't happen, but it was totally his own lead on the weaning, on day weaning. I mean, we did definitely encourage the night weaning, but for day weaning, it was definitely from his own lead. So I felt good about that, despite it not being what I had envisioned, because I had envisioned making it to 2 years and hoping I do with my daughter, which I will talk about her journey next. So we had my daughter in January, so she's 4 months old, and she was a totally different experience when she was born. She latched immediately within an hour after birth. She nursed perfectly. We still had troubles at the hospital, and I was still glad to have the colostrum because she was low birth weight. And as a result of being low birth weight, she had glucose testing every 3 hours. And so if a reading was low, they were like, they wanted to give us a glucose syrup thing. So I was able to give her extra milk through the syringes, which just kept her blood sugar up. Again, I needed that pump colostrum. I was really glad I had it. That is my big tip. If you are pregnant, is to harvest some colostrum if you plan to breastfeed. I think it's very, very helpful, especially if you're at a hospital that is not super supportive of breastfeeding, which our hospital was definitely not very supportive of breastfeeding. I mean, on paper they are, but you could tell it was definitely like an inconvenience to them, it felt like a lot of the time. and I did not have great success with lactation consultants there. I know that it varies so much hospital to hospital. There were some things going on at the time with both of my babies. My first was during COVID, and there was some drama at the hospital when my second was born as well. So I don't know if that's the situation all the time, but I definitely did not feel very supported in breastfeeding. So I was really glad to have that pumped colostrum that just gave me the confidence to be like, nope, I've got this. So anyway, she latched perfectly, no problems there. And we really haven't had any problems since. I've had such an easy time with my daughter with breastfeeding. I have oversupply still, so I've definitely not struggled there, which I know is a really hard thing for a lot of people. And I've been very lucky with that. But she has nursed really easily. She nurses all the time. And with my son, I paid a lot more attention to how often and what the timings were. With my daughter, I really just followed her lead and just went based on cues, etc. And that made things so much easier for me. And not having the shields that I have to wash every time, loved that. So yeah, so that's where we are. And I will say one thing I realized through nursing both of my children is nursing newborns is hard. So my son, it was hard for a lot of reasons. It was hard because he was having latching problems. It was hard because I had the shields that I had to wash between every time. It was hard for all those reasons. But with my daughter, it still was not easy, even though everything went well, which I just realized through that, I love nursing. I love nursing older babies. I love nursing my toddler. Nursing a newborn is not my favorite thing. They need to eat all the time. It's so sudden when they need to eat. I leak a lot, all sorts of things like that. It tends to take longer. My son was a way slower nurser than my daughter, which makes sense with the latching issues, which is definitely different and lovely now. She is a very quick nurser, which I do love. But in general, there are a lot of challenges, and I realized that. And now my daughter's 4 months, and it is amazing. I love nursing her now. It is so easy, and I feel so, so grateful. So yeah, I definitely feel like I've had a pretty easy journey with my daughter. My son, I had some more challenges, but we got through it. I definitely feel very privileged to have a large milk supply and things like that. And I did have resources, even though the hospital was not super supportive. I feel like I did a lot of research. I read a lot of books beforehand, and I have a friend who's a lactation consultant who gave me actually really helpful advice. So that's been our journey. And with my daughter, I'm really hoping to make it till 2. We'll see. With my son, it was because I got pregnant, my supply dropped. We'll see what happens this time. I'm not pregnant, definitely not pregnant yet. But we'll see if I do get pregnant while she's still nursing, if she would continue nursing. With my son, as I said, he nursed through part of pregnancy, but then he self-weaned. And I was always open to the fact that he could start nursing again when she was born, and we would tandem feed. And I'd kind of hoped that would happen. So he was 21 months when she was born. So I was sort of hoping maybe he'd still be interested, and he was interested, but he would ask for milk, and then I would open up and give him on the other side, and he would come up to me and not latch. You'd have no idea what he was doing anymore, which is so funny. I just hadn't even realized that was sort of a thing, that they just could lose it so quickly, because at 20 months or, 19 or 20 months was the last time he nursed, and he obviously still knew how then. And then by 21 months, and a month or 2 later, he had no idea. Probably a month and a half later, no idea. So that was interesting. But I was really open to tandem nursing. I'd hoped to tandem nurse, and I was also open to starting up again when the baby was born. Did not happen. Okay. I did give him some pumped milk, and I was excited to be able to give him that, especially since we had some sickness going around in January, right after my daughter was born. But yeah, so we'll see what happens with my daughter going forward. And I would expect we'll do a similar thing on night weaning, but really wait till she's ready, which is what we basically did with my son. I think that the fact that my supply had dropped definitely made that easier. So by the time we were night weaning, I was a few months pregnant and my supply had dropped. And I think made it easier for us to night wean. So we'll see with my daughter what happens when I become pregnant with my next baby, etc. So thank you so much for joining. And I just wanted to say, I hope you feel supported in whatever your journey looks like. So whether that looks like breastfeeding for 3, 4, whatever number of years, or that looks like not breastfeeding at all and giving formula from the beginning, or combo feeding, or anything in between, whatever it looks like, I hope you feel supported. As I mentioned, there were some points where I felt judgment about extended breastfeeding past a year, about the fact that we never introduced bottles was definitely something that I felt a lot of judgment for. Even just the fact that I was continuing through when things were more difficult with my son, there was definitely judgment from lactation consultants, etc. At the hospital. Not other ones outside the hospital, but the ones at the hospital. And so, and I know on the other hand, people who formula feed often feel a lot of judgment for that. Regardless of whatever your journey is, I hope that you feel supported, and I hope that you know that no matter what it is, whether you're breastfeeding for 2, 3, 4 years, or whether you're not at all and you're doing formula right away, we're all doing the best we have with the resources, the information, etc. that we have in our own, what feels right to us. So I hope you feel supported, and yeah, I just wanted to say that whatever you're doing, you know, we all choose what we do is best, what we feel is best for our family. So I don't want anything to come off as judgment. This is solely, you know, my own journey. And for me, breastfeeding was something that I really loved and continue to love. And it's not for everyone, and that's totally fine too. So thank you so much for joining. Drop any questions below, hit the like button if you like the video, and come back for more about Montessori, respectful parenting, motherhood, and all sorts of things like that. Thank you so much for joining.